mother flew 2,000 miles to Seattle for my brother's startup launch party. She stood on a rented rooftop holding a glass of champagne, telling everyone how proud she was. 3 weeks later, she told me she couldn't drive the 45 minutes to my daughter's adoption finalization hearing because the traffic on the interstate did a number on her hips. I sat in that courtroom holding my husband's hand while the seat beside me stayed empty. The judge smiled at us. My daughter, 4 years old, swung her legs under the chair and asked me where Grandma was. I didn't have an answer that a 4-year-old should hear. 2 months after that, my mother showed up at the clinic where I work, carrying a manila envelope with my name printed across the front in my father's old typewriter font. She wasn't there to apologize. She wasn't there to meet her granddaughter. She was there because she needed something from me, and she had no idea that the thing inside that envelope was about to end the version of our family she'd spent 31 years protecting. But I need to back up, because this didn't start with the empty courtroom seat. It started before I could even talk. My name is Ren. No, let me give you the real one. People call me by my middle name now. But back then I was just the older one. The practice run. The kid they had, before they figured out what they actually wanted. My brother arrived when I was 4, and from the moment my mother carried him through the front door, I understood, in the wordless way small children understand things, that the temperature in the house had changed. She held him like he was made of something rare. She held me like I was a chore she'd already done. I'm 31 now. I'm a pediatric nurse in Spokane. I have a husband named Tomas who teaches middle school science. A daughter we waited 4 years through the foster system to call legally ours. And a small house on the east side of town with a crooked apple tree in the backyard. I built every piece of that life with my own 2 hands, and for most of those 31 years, I kept hoping my mother would notice. She never did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The earliest memory I can date is from when I was 7. It was my brother's 3rd birthday. My mother had ordered a custom cake shaped like a fire truck, hired a man to bring a pony into the backyard, and invited what felt like half the neighborhood. I remember standing at the edge of the lawn in a dress that was a little too small, watching kids I barely knew line up to pet the pony. When my own 7th birthday had come, 4 months earlier, my mother had given me a card with $20 in it, and told me I was old enough now that I didn't need a fuss. I remember doing the math even then. I remember thinking in my 7-year-old way that there must be something wrong with me that I couldn't see, some defect that made me worth less. Kids always assume the math points back at them. It didn't get better. It calcified. By the time I was in middle school, the pattern had a shape I could name even if I couldn't say it out loud. My brother, let's call him what my mother called him, her miracle. Because she got pregnant with him after 2 miscarriages and decided that made him sacred. My brother got the new bike. I got his old one, with the rust on the chain. He got the braces. My crooked front tooth, the dentist said, wasn't medically necessary. And so I grew up learning to smile with my mouth closed. He played travel hockey, which meant tournaments in 3 states and the equipment bag that cost more than my entire wardrobe. One daughter is a doctor. Well, fire. And they needed $40 for the trip. My mother sighed and said money was tight and maybe I could ask my choir teacher about a scholarship. I asked my choir teacher about a scholarship. I was 12. I have never forgotten the look on Mrs. Band Holloway's face when she realized why I was asking. The thing about being the overlooked child is that you become very, very good at not needing things. You learn to want quietly, to ask for nothing, to perform a kind of cheerful self-sufficiency that adults mistake for maturity. She's so independent, my mother used to tell people. Like it was a gift she'd given me instead of a wound she'd inflicted. I got a job at 14, the second I was legally allowed. bagging groceries at the Rose Hours on the corner. By 16, I was working 25 hours a week and saving every dollar in an account my parents didn't know about, because I'd learned the hard way that anything I had, anything good, had a way of getting redirected toward my brother. College was where the divide stopped being subtle and became a ledger. I got into the nursing program at Washington State with a partial scholarship. Partial. The rest I covered with loans and with the money I'd been hoarding since I was 14, and with 2 jobs I worked through every semester. I lived in the cheapest apartment I could find, ate a lot of rice and frozen vegetables, and graduated with $38,000 in debt and a body that had forgotten what 8 hours of sleep felt like. My brother got into a private university in California 2 years later. My parents paid for all of it. Tuition, the dorm, the meal plan, a car so he could get around, a study abroad semester in Barcelona that cost more than my first 2 years combined. I know the numbers, because I asked, once, gently, at a Thanksgiving when I was 23 and drowning, whether they might be able to help me with even one loan payment. My father set down his fork. My mother looked at me like I'd asked to borrow a kidney. "Your brother's situation is different," she said. "He needs the support. You've always landed on your feet." I'd always landed on my feet because they'd never once offered to catch me. But you don't say that at Thanksgiving. You smile with your mouth closed, and you pass the rolls. Here is the part I'm least proud of. For 10 years from the time I was 24, I sent my parents money. $300 a month. It started when my father lost his job in the recession and my mother called me crying. And even though my brother made twice what I did, even though he was the one with the cushion they built him, it was me she called. It was always me she called when there was a problem, and always him she called when there was a celebration. I sent the $300 because some animal part of me still believed that if I was useful enough, if I was good enough, dependable enough, she'd finally turn and look at me the way she looked at him. $300 a month for 10 years. $36,000. I have never told anyone that number until now. Not even Thomas. Until everything came out. There was a winter. I was 27. When my own car died and I couldn't afford to fix it, and I took the bus to work in the dark for 3 months rather than miss a payment to them. They never thanked me. It was just the air we breathed. The tax I paid for the crime of having made it out without their help. I met Thomas at a friend's barbecue when I was 28. He was the kind of steady I'd never trusted before. A man who listened to the whole sentence before he answered. On our 4th date, I introduced him to my parents. Afterward, in the car, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your mom touched your brother's name 3 times in conversation tonight. She didn't ask you a single question about yourself." I started to defend her out of pure reflex, and then I stopped, because no one had ever said it out loud before. No one had ever confirmed that the thing I felt was real. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony by the river. My parents came. They left before the dancing because my mother said my brother had a big work thing the next morning in another city, and they wanted to drive out to support him. I watched them go from the dance floor. Tomas pulled me close, and we kept dancing anyway, and I told myself it didn't matter. The way I'd told myself nothing mattered my whole life. Then came the part I actually want to tell you about. Because this is where I stopped telling myself it didn't matter. Tomas and I couldn't have children of our own. We tried, quietly, for 2 years, through the kind of disappointment that doesn't have a public language. And then we found our way to the foster system. And then we found a girl. 3 years old when she came to us, scared of loud noises and hoarding food under her pillow. And over 2 years she became ours in every way except the legal one. The finalization hearing was set for a Tuesday in October. It was, without exaggeration, the most important day of my life. The day a court would say out loud that this child belonged to me, and I belonged to her. I called my mother to invite her. I was nervous, which tells you everything about our relationship. I was nervous to invite my own mother to meet her granddaughter. She paused on the phone. Oh, honey, October's so busy. And that drive, you know how the interstate is on my hips. 45 minutes. The same woman had flown 2,000 miles to Seattle 3 weeks earlier to stand on a rooftop and toast my brother's app that helped people rent power tools. I didn't argue. I'd stopped arguing somewhere in my 20s. I just said okay and hung up and sat in my car in the clinic parking lot and felt something old and tired finally start to crack. The hearing was beautiful and brief. Thomas cried. The judge let my daughter bang the gavel. There was an empty chair at the end of our row where I'd reserved a seat. And afterward, my daughter asked me, in front of everyone, where Grandma was. I knelt down and told her Grandma couldn't come today. And that was when I understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that I would not let this child grow up learning the arithmetic I'd learned. I would not let her sit at the edge of the lawn watching the pony and wondering what was wrong with her. The cycle stopped with me, even if I had to break my own heart to do it. For 6 weeks after that, I went quiet. I didn't call. I didn't send the $300 in November for the first time in 10 years. My mother didn't notice the silence, but she noticed the money. Which brings us back to the manila envelope. It was a Thursday afternoon in December when the front desk paged me. Your mother is here to see you. I felt my stomach drop the way it had when I was a kid and heard her car in the driveway. I found her in the waiting room in her good coat, the camel one she wore to my brother's events, holding that envelope against her chest like a shield. She looked older than I remembered. Smaller. For one stupid second, I thought she'd come to apologize, to meet her granddaughter, and the 7-year-old inside me lit up like a porch light. I took her to the little staff break room because it had a door. She didn't sit. She set the envelope on the table. I need you to sign something, she said. Not hello. Not how's the baby. Not I'm sorry I missed it. I asked what it was. She told me it was about my grandmother's estate, my father's mother, who had died when I was 16. I remembered the funeral. I remembered my grandmother as one of the only adults who ever seemed to actually see me, who'd slip me a $5 bill and a wink and tell me I was the sharp one. I asked why we were talking about an estate 15 years later. My mother's mouth tightened. She said the lawyer handling some final paperwork had questions about an old account, and that all I needed to do was sign a form saying everything had been settled fairly, and then it would all go away. She slid a paper across the table toward me, and underneath it, when she pulled out the first one, I saw the corner of another document. A bank statement. And I don't know what made me do it. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that made me hide money at 14. But I reached past the form she wanted me to sign and I picked up the whole envelope and dumped it out on the table. She said my name sharply, the way she used to when I'd embarrassed her. I ignored her. The form on top said in legal language I had to read 3 times that I, the undersigned beneficiary, acknowledged receipt in full of the funds held in trust under a custodial education account and released the estate from any further obligation, confirming all funds had been used for my benefit. I had never heard of any custodial account. I had paid for my own education with loans and rice and 25-hour work weeks. I started going through the rest of the papers. My mother was talking, fast now, saying it was complicated, saying the lawyer was just being thorough, saying I was making this into something it wasn't. I wasn't listening. I was reading a document dated the year I was 8 years old, a custodial account, established by my grandmother, naming me as the sole beneficiary, funded with an initial deposit of $110,000, intended for my education, with my mother and father listed as the custodians who were legally bound to manage it for me and me alone. $110,000. Then the bank statements. Years of them. And I sat in that break room with the fluorescent light buzzing, and I watched, line by line, where my education had gone. A withdrawal the year my brother started private high school. A withdrawal the size of a year of his college tuition. A withdrawal labeled in my father's neat hand on a memo line, study abroad. Deposit. Barcelona. My grandmother's money. Money she'd left specifically for me. The granddaughter she called the sharp one. Had paid for my brother's semester in Spain while I rode the bus to work in the dark to keep sending them $300 a month. I looked up at my mother. I think some part of me was still hoping she'd say there was an explanation, that I'd misread it, that the world was not as ugly as the paper in my hand said it was. Family money is family money, she said. Your brother needed it more. You were always going to be fine. I didn't yell. I want you to know that. After 31 years, I didn't have a single thing left to yell about. I asked her one question. I asked her if Grandma had known. If she'd watched me struggle through nursing school and known the whole time that there was money sitting in an account with my name on it. My mother looked away. And in that looking away, I had my answer. And I understood that she had not come to apologize or to meet her granddaughter. She had come because some lawyer, 15 years too late, had finally started asking the question I never knew to ask. She'd come to get my signature, so the whole thing would stay buried. I told her to leave. She didn't move at first. She said, if you don't sign this, it makes things very difficult for your brother. He's counting on the rest of the estate. You'd really do that to him? I looked at the woman who had flown across a country for a power tool app and couldn't drive across a county for her granddaughter, and I said very quietly, get out of my workplace. She gathered her good coat around her. She left the envelope. She was so rattled, so used to me folding, that she walked out and left every single page of evidence sitting on that breakroom table. I drove home that night with the envelope on the passenger seat, where the empty grandmother-shaped silence had been. Tomas was making dinner. My daughter was coloring at the kitchen table. I waited until she was in bed, and then I spread all of it across our own table. And Tomas read it twice without speaking. When he finally looked up, he didn't say I'm sorry or that's awful. He said, babe, this isn't favoritism. This is theft. You were the beneficiary. They were trustees. They had a legal duty to you. I found a lawyer the next week. Her name was on a sign downtown. 3 names, a small firm that handled trusts and estates. She was somewhere in her 50s, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and she went through my envelope the way a surgeon goes through a chart. When she finished, she took off the glasses and said that in 22 years she had rarely seen documentation this clean. A custodial account. A clear beneficiary. Custodians with a fiduciary duty under state law to use the funds for me and me alone. Withdrawals that lined up, dollar for dollar, year for year, with my brother's expenses. This isn't a family disagreement, she said. This is a breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on what we find, possibly conversion. That's the civil word for theft. I asked her what I could do. She said we could send a demand letter requesting a full accounting and the return of the principal plus interest. If they refused, we could file suit. And given the documentation, given the witnesses if I had any, we would very likely win. Witnesses. I thought of my grandmother, who couldn't testify from the grave, and then I thought of my great-aunt, my grandmother's sister, who was 86 and sharp as a tack, and lived 2 hours north in a little house full of doilies. I drove up that weekend. She took my hand across her kitchen table when I told her, and she said, "Sweetheart, your grandmother set that money aside for you because she was afraid of exactly this. She told me she didn't trust your mother to be fair. She made me promise that if anything ever happened, I'd tell the truth. I've been waiting 15 years for someone to ask." She signed an affidavit. So did my grandmother's old attorney, a man now retired who still had his files and remembered, clearly, A woman who'd come in specifically because she wanted to protect one particular granddaughter from a family she worried would overlook her. The demand letter went out in January. My parents got a lawyer. There were 2 months of letters and one tense afternoon in a conference room where my father wouldn't meet my eyes and my mother kept saying that I was tearing the family apart, as if the family had been whole, as if she hadn't broken it herself. One withheld birthday at a time. My lawyer laid the documentation on the table. My parents' lawyer looked at it, then looked at his clients and asked for a recess. When they came back, they wanted to settle. We settled for the full principal, $110,000, plus the interest it would have earned over 15 years, which my lawyer calculated and their lawyer didn't seriously contest. The total was a little over $240,000. The day the wire hit my account, I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot, the same lot where I'd cracked open 8 months earlier, and I looked at a number I had never imagined seeing next to my name. I paid off my student loans first. $38,000, 15 years of monthly dread. Gone with one transfer. Then I paid off the small loan Thomas still carried from his own degree. Then Thomas and I sat at the kitchen table and looked at our daughter's college fund, which had been a hopeful little trickle of $40 a month, and we put in enough that she would never, ever have to ask a teacher about a scholarship. She would never have to do the math. She would never sit at the edge of the lawn. I want to tell you, the settlement was the end. But the better part came 2 weeks later. In a small padded envelope my great-aunt mailed me. Inside was a letter my grandmother had written and left with her. Sealed. To be sent to me only if the money ever became a problem. The handwriting was shaky, but it was hers. She wrote that she had seen me, that she had watched me make myself small so that others could feel big, and that it had broken her heart. She wrote that being strong was not the same as not deserving to be taken care of. She wrote that I was the sharp one, the kind one, the one who would carry the family's better self forward, and that the money was not charity, it was an inheritance of belief. At the bottom she wrote, "Don't let anyone convince you that you matter less. You never did. Not for one single day." There was a small box, too. Inside was her wedding ring. A thin gold band with a tiny garnet, nothing fancy. The ring my mother had apparently always wanted and never gotten. My grandmother had left it to me. I wear it on my right hand now. It fits like it was sized for me. I took some of the money and I did something my grandmother would have understood. I set up a fund at the community college near us. A small annual scholarship for kids aging out of foster care who want to go into nursing. Kids with no family money behind them. Kids who've already learned the arithmetic too young. The first recipient is a 19-year-old who works 2 jobs and hasn't spoken to her own family in 3 years. When I called to tell her, she went silent on the phone and then asked, very quietly, if it was real. I told her it was. I told her she deserved it. I told her to build the life she wanted and not to make herself small for anyone. I haven't spoken to my parents since the day in the conference room. I haven't spoken to my brother since he texted me after the settlement to say that I'd always been jealous and that this was so like me. I won't pretend it doesn't ache. It does. But it doesn't ache because I miss them. It aches because I'm grieving a mother who was never going to show up, a father who was never going to protect me, a brother who was always going to take. I'm mourning a family I invented in my head at 7 years old and kept hoping into existence for 24 more years. But I'm not mourning the woman I used to be, the one who sent the $300 in the dark, who smiled with her mouth closed, who kept waiting to be chosen. She's gone. In her place is a woman who owns her own house with a crooked apple tree, who married a man who listens to the whole sentence, who has a daughter that will never wonder what's wrong with her, who wears her grandmother's ring and knows, finally, all the way down, that the math was never about her at all. My grandmother tried to buy me a future once, and they spent it on the child they preferred. So I went and took it back. Every dollar with interest. And then I built something they could never touch. A daughter who knows she's wanted. A girl in nursing school who knows she's seen. And a quiet, ordinary, unglamorous life that is mine, fully mine, down to the last cent. They left a seat empty for me my whole life, so I stopped saving them one